on that? Do empaths exist?
I think that we are all empaths. At the time that I learned the term and I learned about it, an empath was a special person, a special kind of unusually emotionally aware person. And the idea was that empaths would go into a room and feel all the emotions that were present. And I think the thing is that all of us do this. It is a function of being a part of a social species. But with empathic people or highly empathic people, generally it is a lack of boundaries. And alongside that, often their own emotional trauma that isn't resolved, right? And so their emotions are continually at the ready, so that if they go into a room where there's some kind of emotional thing going on, their emotions will be, they'll jump on that train and they'll go with it. So when I work with hyperempathic people, I definitely teach them how to identify emotions in themselves and others, how to regulate them, and how to set boundaries so that they begin to have a sense of, okay, this is me and these are my emotions. That is you and those are your emotions. I can join in if I feel like it, but I can also not join in. And that, I think, is a big change for most hyperempathic people, because they have actually no sense of agency around other people's emotions. And a lot of that travels back to childhood. Yeah, it may even have been life-saving if they grew up in a violent or emotionally abusive family. Absolutely. To drop your boundaries and become what the other person needs you to be, that's genius. With a depressive parent, well, what are you supposed to do if you feel happy? You may need to shut that down because it's in the way, right? What about when you feel exuberant? You may need to shut that down because your parents' boundaries are not strong either. So it's very much a part of your relationship to try to almost balance what's happening, which is totally unfair to have a child do, and yet it happens every day.
But for people who still think that emotions are holding them back or too much or just getting in the way of life, can you say one or two things to them?
Your emotions contain multitudes. I like to say emotions are always true. They're always true about something. They're not always right, because you need to help them figure out what's going on sometimes. But they're always true. If you have an intense panic response, something around you is making you feel as if your life is in danger. So we need to work with that. Follow the emotions rather than saying, panic, damn it, there's nothing here that's going to kill me. So why are you don't shame your emotions, but just sit and say, why do I feel that my life is in danger right now? And track it. Help your emotions. Your emotion is trying to give you the information. Help it get to the information. And rather than treating it like it's the problem, I always say emotions are not the problem. They bring you the skills to deal with the problem. Yeah.
Good. Hello everyone. Welcome to Eggshell Transformations, a podcast for intense people. My name is Imi, and I'm here with you on a journey. I'm delighted to share with you this very special episode where I speak to Carla McLaren. Carla is an award-winning author and a true pioneer. She has dedicated her life's work to study emotions and empathy. In this conversation, I asked Carla what she thought about the word empath, why some people seem to have too much empathy and others too little, and whether these tendencies are a product of nature or nurture. Carla offered us some tips to have better emotional and energetic boundaries, to better manage our mood swings, and she even gave us some ideas on how to work through our anger and shame. Carla's passion and knowledge for this work really showed. I'm amazed by how much I've learned from this short conversation with her, and I think you will too. In the show notes, you will find an edited transcript. It's full of gems, and I would encourage you to have a look. Now to Carla.
Carla,
Thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me. I have adored your work from the very beginning of my career. I have your book, The Language of Emotions, from the very beginning, and being able to talk to you is a bit like a dream.
Thank you.
So,
I'm glad to be here today.
It's still on my bookshelf. So, Carla, you are an award-winning author, a social science researcher, and empathy pioneer. So I would like to start from the beginning. Very curious about what have sparked your interest in studying emotions and empathy. When did you begin the journey, and how did it unfold?
The story is one of early childhood trauma. And for me, learning about emotions was not I'd like to learn about emotions. It's like, that would be interesting. And I would have a pipe and, I would be studying emotions. A part of my trauma was that I learned to dissociate. And I would have really intense emotional responses, but I would leave. So my body was just alone, trying to work things out or trying to survive. And so I ended up developing a very intense emotional life, extreme highs and lows. And so for me, studying the emotions was it was a life-saving approach. I needed to understand what was happening to me and what these powerful things were doing in my life. And then by learning to understand them, I learned their language, and I learned how to regulate them so that I could live more comfortably.
Yeah. Were you born quite intense, or do you think it was your difficult childhood experience that has created the intensity?
I think both. My mom was very empathic. I was the most, I think, intense, emotional kid in the. It happened so early. I would have to say, no, my mom said that I came out screaming. So maybe I had some things to say loudly as a baby.
Do you have siblings?
Yes, I'm one of 5.
Wow. Are they as intense or emotional?
Yes, each of them is in their own way, but differently, and the males have dealt with it in a very different way than the females, of course.
Yeah. You spoke about empathy and the way your mom was. The word empath has become very popular in recent years. And not so much in conventional psychology, but so much in the mainstream media, esoteric realm. People talk about it as related to clairvoyance, for example. The term is used to describe people who absorb, somehow seems to be taking in other people's feelings and have very porous, just very thin emotional boundaries. Mm-hmm. I couldn't find any psychology literature about it apart from emotional contagion.
Yeah.
What's your view on that? Do empaths exist?
I think that we are all empaths. At the time that I learned the term and I learned about it, an empath was a special person, a special kind of unusually emotionally aware person. And the idea was that empaths would go into a room and feel all the emotions that were present. And I think the thing is that all of us do this. It is a function of being a part of a social species. But with empathic people or highly empathic people, generally it is a lack of boundaries. And alongside that, often their own emotional trauma that isn't resolved, right? And so their emotions are continually at the ready, so that if they go into a room where there's some kind of emotional thing going on, their emotions will be, they'll jump on that train and they'll go with it. So when I work with hyperempathic people, I definitely teach them how to identify emotions in themselves and others, how to regulate them, and how to set boundaries so that they begin to have a sense of, okay, this is me and these are my emotions. That is you and those are your emotions. I can join in if I feel like it, but I can also not join in. And that, I think, is a big change for most hyperempathic people because they have actually no sense of agency around other people's emotions. And a lot of that travels back to childhood.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
also prefer the term hyperempathics to empaths.
yeah.
Mm.
Because it talks about there could be an empathic that isn't hyper, right? And we can also talk about hypoempathy. So to know that there's a range and that you can bring the range closer to a comfortable place. If you're hypoempathic, you would also be having a very difficult time because you couldn't identify what's going on around you. And then you're really not a part of the community because you're sort of missing the joke or missing the thread of the conversation at all times.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Do you think people can become hypo-empathic due to trauma?
Yes, definitely. Definitely.
And in fact, maybe the question should be, is it a nurture thing, a trauma thing, rather than a nature thing?
There is such a thing as trait empathy. There are people who have higher and lower aspects of trait empathy. But even those people in the presence of difference may go to zero empathy. And even people with a lower empathy in the presence of similarity or laughter or other emotions or crying, they would go into hypoempathy. So there's a lot of, I have a post brewing called "Is Empathy a Trait or is Empathy an Interaction?" And it's kind of like Schrodinger's cat. Yes, it's both. If you open the box, it's both. So we have a certain level of empathy that we come in with or the capacity for. It develops before the age of 2. There's a very important window in there where we can miss the things that we need to develop empathy properly. And then from 2 forward, then, what happens? What happens? Are we in empathic classrooms in school? Do we find empathic mates? Do we find empathically supportive jobs?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's an interaction as well as a trait.
Yeah, you did mention that you can teach hyper-empathic people to have better emotional boundaries. Can you say a bit more about that? What does emotional boundaries mean, and maybe give us a few life strategies to start practicing, just little things people can start doing if they feel that they are prone to hyper-empathy?
Yes, one of the most important things, and I was surprised about this, a number of years ago, I'd started developing an emotional vocabulary list because people kept asking. Yeah. And so I went on Facebook and my website, and I just asked everybody to give me some great words, and we put them all we organized them. Later research has shown that just developing a better emotional vocabulary will give you emotion regulation skills all by itself. So learn some words, get better at regulating emotions. It's awesome. It's cheap. It's free. And on my site, I have the emotional vocabulary list, so people can just download it. But learning about emotions, part of setting boundaries is learning about yourself, right? You have to have a self before you can create a boundary around the self. And I do these both. I mean, I teach people an actual boundary exercise where, I don't know what you can see, but to feel around themselves at the space where their hands can reach, that the brain and the nervous system already map this area as personal space. So this area, of course, it will move. If you're in an elevator, your personal space will come in and, that sort of thing. Your personal space knows where you are in space and time. And it is something that you would just know. Don't reach out like that because there's something there and you could hurt yourself. So there's a constant awareness that your body has. And so I lean into this and help people get a sense of that space that's already there. Yeah. And then try to imagine it as an edge. Yeah. So that person over there, even if they're in the elevator with me, that person over there is feeling anxiety or, whatever. I am not feeling anxiety right now. What am I feeling? Rather than, oh my word, there's anxiety in the elevator. I've got to go into it.
Yeah, there's a separation.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Wow. So is it useful to have it visualized?
For some people, the visualization is very helpful. For some people, that's not how their brain works. So they would need to feel it, uh, draw it. Some people put like a ribbon around the floor so they can look at it and get a sense of where do I begin and end. And for people who grew up in very enmeshed families,
Yeah.
it is more difficult because a part of their survival and a part of their family identification is you can't have boundaries.
I absolutely agree. And they have been
Okay.
so trained to watch out
Yeah.
for the slightest change in the air to
Yeah.
protect themselves or their siblings.
Yeah. Yeah. And so a lot of people will start doing this work and, they might write to me or take a class and say, I'm failing at boundaries. I can't do it. And I say, hold on. There is something in you that knows that this is going against a rule in the psyche or the family. So you're not failing. You're triumphant at noticing the situation that's real.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they have been very successful in developing a strategy that has helped them for many, many years.
Yeah, it may even have been life-saving if they grew up in a violent or emotionally abusive family.
Absolutely.
To drop your boundaries and become what the other person needs you to be, that's genius.
Yeah. Or
But,
even if
yeah.
go on. Or even if
Go ahead.
or even if their caretaker or parents are just vulnerable or depressed and they feel like they need to take care of their parents.
Yes, with a depressive parent, well, what are you supposed to do if you feel happy? You may need to shut that down because it's in the way, right? What about when you feel exuberant? You may need to shut that down because your parents' boundaries are not strong either. So it's very much a part of your relationship to try to almost balance what's happening, which is totally unfair to have a child do, and yet it happens every day.
Happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or, if I'm happy and successful, maybe I'm betraying my depressed mother.
Yeah. And I also noticed that in some families, there will be a lot of repression of emotion. Just, we can't handle emotion. We don't need it. It's irrational. And then someone in the family will be an emotional, it'll be a Broadway show every day with emotions with this person. And they call, in psychology, they call this the identified patient.
Yeah.
And it's the whole system that has created a need for this one to explode with emotion. And
well, they're expressing what everyone else is feeling but not saying.
Yeah, and if there's no boundaries in the house, then those emotions have to go somewhere. And they are likely going to go into that person. And that's something I find with hyperempathic people is if they go into a room and there's an emotion that's not being felt or stated properly, they will likely feel it.
Yeah.
And they see it as a failure. And I said, well, wait a minute. Emotions are these brilliant, genius things that have all this glorious beauty to them. And they're sitting there in people who will not respect them. And the emotion sees you come into the room and it's like, yay, I get someone to play with.
Yeah.
And so if I have skills for those emotions and there's a lot of anger in the room, I'm like, cool. Now I can set boundaries, right? Instead of, anger is horrible, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we will talk a little bit about each of the emotions later because that is another big part of your work. Your book, The Language of Emotions, has a strong influence on me. As I said, it has been sitting on my shelf since the beginning of my career. What I admire the most about your thesis is the idea that no emotion is good or bad. All of them are a messenger. They're here to teach us something. It's a really helpful way of thinking about it. And I think it helps a lot of people.
Thank you.
Yeah. If we could all learn to be a bit more emotionally literate from a younger age, the world will probably be a better place. What kind of trouble do we as individuals or society run into if we don't have the language to express how we feel?
First, we become inarticulate about the contents of our own souls. And that's never a good idea. It is as if we don't know how to work our muscles, or don't know how to move our legs, or don't know how to form words. And so in the area of emotion, which is likely, I would say it is being shown more and more that emotions form the foundation of everything we think, all of our decisions, our actions, our behavior, who we choose as friends, who we choose to get into relationships with, how we choose our jobs. So emotions, I don't want to say control, it's not a good word. They underlie everything we do. If we don't understand them, we will literally be puppets of forces that we don't know, we can't access, we cannot speak to, and we can't manage in any way. And so we may choose relationships or jobs that smell like the situations that traumatized us as children, and get in there and say, why do I keep doing this to myself? And then fall into a spiral of, self-shaming and stuff. Instead of seeing the genius that your emotions are saying, oh, you're 25 now. Here's a really terrible situation that you could not deal with when you were 3. So yay us. Except you don't know your emotions, so you can't get to that.
Yeah.
The reason they're doing this, right? It's just you are out of control, and you're a mess. Instead of seeing the kind of sacred genius underneath these things that are pushing you. Yeah.
Why do we demonize certain emotions and consider them bad?
One of the things I'm thinking is that the emotions that we call negative are emotions that shake things up. Anger, anxiety, fear, panic, jealousy, envy, sadness, grief. These are emotions that challenge the status quo and how things are going and how we've all agreed they should go. And anger will stand up and say, I don't agree. And they'll say, well, that's a negative emotion.
And change is scary.
Yeah. And the positive emotions, happiness, contentment, and joy, are usually the emotions that support the status quo. So I think there's some social control in the positive and negative emotion.
It's an inconvenience for us if you feel angry.
Yes. It will stop this party and turn it into something real.
Yeah. And how can anger be useful?
I love anger. I love it so much. Anger
My therapist says the same, and it took me 6 years. No, it has taken me 6 years, and I still want to punch him in the face when he says that.
With your anger.
Angry, and you go, Amy, I love it when you get angry. Not helpful.
At its core, anger is the emotion that helps you set boundaries around what you value. That's what it does. Now, people's skills with anger are what most of us are complaining about, because let's say you don't know how to set boundaries in a healthy way. So you might not set boundaries at all, which means that nobody knows what you value. They may have to tiptoe around you because you may react to something that if you had just said it out loud, it's important to me that you show up on time or whatever. Then they would know, if I care about Emmy, I need to show up on time. And if I'm not going to show up on time, I need to text her, right? Now, let's say you're not good with boundaries in the other direction, and you set violent boundaries that are rigid and they're like brick walls. So you say, if you're coming to see me and you're even a second late, I will not answer the door. That's a boundary. But it has it has separated you from relationship. It has made you into the problem. And there's a punishment going on, right? it's still a boundary. There's still an issue there. The value is timeliness. But the person who can't set the boundary, you're just left to guess. You're going to have to manage the relationship yourself. And the person who's setting these boundaries with fire, you don't have it to guess anymore, right? It's more clear, but there's no welcome in it. And if a person says to you, timeliness is really important to me, so I would appreciate it if you would tell me if you were going to be late. And there doesn't need to be, or the other foot's going to drop, the other shoe's going to drop, or our relationship is over. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So basically, the person who knows how to use boundaries and anger well is a person who has a bit of a self concept that doesn't depend on you figuring it out psychically what they need, or it doesn't depend on you behaving perfectly in each second of every day, or everything's going to fall apart. So the work with anger is probably takes 6 years.
Right? Still, yeah. Especially because of my childhood conditioning, it's very hard to even stop being afraid of it.
Yeah.
I also come from a culture where people like to keep the peace. It's very unusual for it to be externally expressed.
Yeah. So if you don't see it, it's mostly repressed. So anger would be this strange undercurrent. You'd almost need to have underwater or night vision glasses to be able to see where the anger's going in that kind of a cultural rule.
Yeah, and I was really shocked. I came to London 8 years ago now, but there was a lot of misunderstanding about me being almost fake, because I wouldn't voice what's negative. And sometimes I get a bit burned or shocked when people will assertively and not violently, but speak out the negative or set the boundaries. It's never done. Partly done, not never. It's very rarely done in my upbringing.
Yeah, and I think your cultural training was so strong, and yet I don't know. The cultural training with emotion is hard to sort of get at with words, because it usually doesn't happen with words. It's with a look. It's everybody turning away from you. It's the conversation stopping, and as a child you did something wrong, and you were doing 4 things at the time. You were skipping, you were yelling, so which one should I stop doing? It's never clear in any kind of repressive emotional world. No one ever gives you the sort of, we don't set boundaries here. They don't say that to you. There's just a silence, almost the way that dogs, I don't know if you've ever seen dogs when they're angry with each other, they will look really hard not at each other. They'll be like, their whole body will be faced toward the other dog, and they'll look really hard not at that dog. And that's what sometimes emotion training feels like to me. It's like, are we dogs right now?
Another emotion that I personally and a lot of people I work with struggle with, shame. Really tough one. What is shame to tell us? What is it shame there to tell us?
Shame is also one of my favorite emotions. If we keep talking, you'll see they all are. These are all my favorite. Shame is anger's sibling. They work side by side. Anger sets boundaries from what's coming in from the outside. Say, nope, that doesn't work for me here. That's not how I want to do this. Shame sets boundaries on the inside, looking at me and responding to any breaking of rules that I have agreed to. And so the trick is to figure out which rules you've agreed to, because shame's job is always to uphold the boundaries from inside out. And let's say that you have some lovely shame rules. I like to thank my hostess when I go to a party. I like to send thank you notes, simple stuff. And so that's really good. But what about if your shame picked up, no one will ever love you unless you're perfect. If you gain 5 pounds, you need to go insane because, right? So there's a lot of messages coming in from the culture that we may not realize we agreed to until our shame starts berating us for. And so the work with shame is to see, what is this agreement? Do I agree with it now? And is it valuable to me? And so we have a practice called burning contracts, because it's a contract you sign, basically. I agree that if I'm not perfect, no one will love me. And that is an impossible contract, and it is an abusive contract. Shame doesn't know that. Shame says, okay, here's what you've agreed to, so I'm going to stand up for that for you. And so burning contracts, people can do it on paper or imaginally, is to put that on there. And a lot of times people will be like, oh my word, that was from Aunt Sophie. I picked that up when I was 4.5 years old, right? So there's all kinds of these messages, many of which don't come at you verbally. You watch. Women are supposed to serve everyone and not eat until everyone is served, right? That kind of thing. And you don't even know that you are running on these contracts and these agreements. Your shame does. And so sometimes your shame can feel abusive.
But it's really a fierce protector of, let's say, our integrity, because it's a contract that we have signed.
And so there's a beauty to it. I mean, it's horrifying if you've picked up messages that are just gruesome. And I did, in my childhood trauma, it was sexual abuse. And this was between the age of like 2 and 4. So I was learning who I was as a person, who I was in community, who I was as a female, right? Who I was in the presence of other people's severe illness and trouble. These were, and I wrote them all down, right? I wrote them all down to survive and didn't know that I did it. I was too little. And so as I grew up, I would continually find myself in very dangerous situations because that part of me was still going. And so learning to burn contracts with all of that stuff was literally life-saving. It made it so that I could see healthy people and safe places.
So maybe one of the ways people can start working through shame is to go inside and investigate what unspoken contracts they have signed, likely from very young age.
I also notice, I got on Instagram, which I don't think is a place for me, because I'm sort of like people's Aunt Carla on Instagram. But I just noticed the continual, and Instagram is a visual medium, right? Everyone's posting pictures of themselves. And I notice how much shaming there is, even if people aren't shaming. Right, they're taking pictures of their bodies, and you know that there's a way to take a picture of your body so it looks like this, and if you're sitting like this, it looks terrible. But it's like a continual, and I've moved those people out, right? But there's a continual hum of perfectionism in the body and in the facial features. And I thought, wow, this is not a place for people who are disabled. This is not a place for people with facial disfigurement. This is only a place for perfection, and it's toxic as hell. But people don't even realize it, right? And there's tremendous shaming happening on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, and people don't even realize it. They don't even realize it. Aunt Carla says, Aunt Carla says, clean that up.
Really thinking about it and thinking about the Facebook wall that I browsed this morning and post that I post out, and how many subtle messages there are that is underneath the surface. You know, on the surface, it's usually a happy post, but what is it really saying? Maybe
we have a Facebook group.
Show that I'm better.
I'm better than you, of course. There's that. Even when I'm struggling, I'm better than you because it has an end. So I went through this thing, and now I'm perfect again.
Yeah.
We have a Facebook group where we do, among other things, bring in memes and look at them emotionally. It's like, what is this meme saying?
Yeah.
What is this telling us? And a lot of the memes about emotions and empathy are really toxic. But people are like, oh, that's lovely. It's a picture of a lady by a river, and she's letting her emotions go down the river. And I'm like,
Can you give us an example if you can remember?
oh, there's one. I turned to anger. I'm going to say this wrong, but I turned to anger and it finally told me its real name was grief. Right? So anger isn't real.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of that. In fact,
there's a lot
amongst psychologists, there is the argument that it's a secondary emotion, isn't it?
Yeah, the secondhand emotion. And my anger goes, really? Because if anger sets a boundary, a lot of times people will go to anger when they're feeling sadness.
Yeah.
So sadness is an emotion that helps you drop everything and soften. There are many places where you should not go into open expressions of sadness because you will be shamed. It's not safe. So your anger will come up and say, screw it, I don't even care. That's not important, right? But anger is not a secondhand emotion there. Anger is doing the work of anger, which is to set a boundary. And then if you have any skills, you'll know, thank you, anger. I'm going to go feel my sadness in a place where it's more, more welcoming. But if people don't understand the purpose of anger, they would see it as a secondhand emotion. Now, there's another emotion that will do this too. I'm feeling sad. It's not safe. Happiness comes forward. Everything's great. It's all good. No one calls happiness a secondhand emotion. Right?
That's right.
It's doing the same thing. Happiness is like, tra-la-la. It's okay. They're in a better place. Everyone dies. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we see that positive, negative emotion nonsense in secondhand emotion talk. I say, nope, anger's doing its job. And for some reason, anger needed to come forward. Now, the way that anger comes forward will be reliant on how a person knows how to use anger. So if I am in a place where I can't cry and it's not safe and I know what I'm doing with anger, what would I do? I might set a physical boundary, say, excuse me, I have to go. And then I'll go cry. Yeah. Instead of, screw you, everybody. Right? Yeah.
I get you. Yeah. I can see a lot of love for these emotions. It's like they're your children.
Oh, they're my friends.
That one, they're adorable. I work with people who have very intense emotions. Some of them embrace their intensity, but not all of us do. I also know many people who resent having to feel anything at all. Many wish they could dial down the volume of their feelings because it's too much. What are your thoughts on this? Can people intentionally turn down the volume?
Yes. And a part of it is recognizing each emotion at its softest place. Right. So I have let me look at my emotional vocabulary list. I made a pocket version, so you can just walk around and go, what? Let's say anger that is very intense would be belligerent or aggressive. We all know that. Anger that it's more of a medium place would be aggravated or affronted or exasperated. Go down to the softness. You might see you feel critical. You feel sarcastic. You feel apathetic. You feel indifferent. We're still in anger, but we're in a soft place with it. And I think for people who go all the way to 11 every time their emotion happens, what is happening is they are not seeing it when it's in the soft place. So I'm feeling indifferent. I don't know, whatever. If I don't have any vocabulary, I won't realize that I'm in the area of anger. I won't realize that it's time to set a boundary now. Right? And so my emotion will get stronger and stronger, and then I'll be up into, aggression.
Yeah.
And belligerence.
So it's catching our emotions when it's in their seeds form.
Yeah. And knowing that it's okay. Sometimes you need to go all the way to 11. But if it's your only speed, it means you're missing so much emotional information throughout every day.
What about people who actually have a mental illness diagnosis that has to do with mood regulation, such as borderline personality disorder or bipolar?
I know that I have a lot of friends with these, and I know that this emotion regulation and emotion identification helps. I think it would be even more important in a mental illness or a psychiatric condition. I have a pretty severe depression, and there's no way to talk about it in a loving way. To say I'm a depressive, it sounds like you don't want me at a party, right? Like, don't bring her, she's depressive. But that is something my brain is very good at, right? To go into severe suicidal depression. And so for me, learning this soft depression, soft suicidal urge is a way to stop myself from going all the way there, because it's not particularly good for your brain to continually go into severe suicidal depression. It can wear a pathway. So for me, learning that, so sometimes I'll say as a joke, if something just looks terrible, like something is just like, ew, I don't even want that. I said, oh my God, that makes me want to kill myself in my own bed. And I'm going, okay, there's suicidal, I'm going to kill myself in my sleep. I said, okay, there's suicidal urge here. Right? It was like taking these jokes. Yeah. It's a weird joke to make and go, okay, now I need to do the work of suicide, which is to find out what in my life cannot be lived and to get rid of it with whatever way I can.
You turned it into an empowering action.
Yeah. And to be very emotionally specific with what just happened.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, so my psyche knows what's going on. It's making little jokes, right? And so it's up to me to catch it. Oops.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. You have a tool called dynamic emotional integration. I have not done it myself, but I'm very curious. I think you have said a lot about how do we harness the healing power of emotions. But for people who still think that emotions are holding them back or too much or just getting in the way of life, can you say one or two things to them?
Your emotions contain multitudes. I like to say emotions are always true. They're always true about something. They're not always right, because you need to help them figure out what's going on sometimes. But they're always true. If you have an intense panic response, something around you is making you feel as if your life is in danger. So we need to work with that. Follow the emotions rather than saying, panic, damn it, there's nothing here that's going to kill me. So why are you like, don't shame your emotions, but just sit and say, why do I feel that my life is in danger right now? And track it. Help your emotions. Your emotions trying to give you the information. Help it get to the information. And rather than treating it like it's the problem, I always say emotions are not the problem. They bring you the skills to deal with the problem.
Yeah. Good. What's your definition of resilience?
The definition of?
Resilience.
Resilient. I would say resilience is your capacity to bring yourself back to a place of balance, knowing that resilience is fluid and malleable. So it's not a destination, but to be able to say, okay, almost when you're dancing, there is a place where your muscles and bones don't have to do much, like you're standing up. But you don't know that your muscles and bones are doing a tremendous amount to help you stand up, right? But we would say, okay, I'm standing and I'm still, and that's resilient. And then I can move this way and I can move that way and I can do this and then come back to center. Yeah. But I think resilience for me is a very flowing state. So if I'm going into deep grief, that is a function of my resilience. And as I am grieving, I am in a stable place with grief, and then I move back to, right? So it's, that's why it's dynamic emotional integration, because it's all moving. All of it is moving.
That's where the name comes from.
Yeah.
Final few questions. Can you share with us a book that has changed your life?
A book that I'm just so grateful about is Ibram Kendi's Stamped from the Beginning. And it is about, oh my gosh, it is about the history of anti-Black racism in America, and it follows slavery. It is one of the most brilliant books I've ever read in my life. And as I looked at and found out about him, he was in his 30s. He's a historian when he wrote it.
Yeah.
And it is a life-changing, world-changing book. And he is such an emotional genius because he goes into the pain. He's a Black man, an American Black man. He just keeps going into it and not flinching and not looking away, but writing a book that's so beautiful and so welcoming. It's not a traumatizing book. And a lot of books about racism and injustice are traumatizing. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank
Finally,
you.
can you share a quote or a song or a poem with us?
Now I have to think.
Anyone that comes into mind would probably be the right one.
It's the one from Language of Emotions. It's that quote from the beginning. And I don't remember it right now. This is something I wrote about the process of healing your life. Because people are like, oh, it's so much work. Beyond sculptures and symphonies, beyond great works and masterpieces, is the greater, finer art of creating a conscious life. Genius appears everywhere, but never so magnificently as in a life well lived.
Wow.
Yay.
Hey. Thank you so much, Carla. That was really beautiful sharing.
Thank you.
So tell us where to find you. I know you have got multiple projects going on at the same time.
Yes.
Yes, what's happening?
KarlaMcLaren.com is my site where I'm talking about books and things. And I have an online learning site called empathyacademy.org. And that is where we teach courses in dynamic emotional integration. So there's a course every month or so for people who just want to take short courses. There's also a 5-month self-care course where you're with a whole community of people working on these things, and it's lovely.
That's amazing. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much for tuning in. For more, please head to eggshelltherapy.com. There you will find more stories, articles, and resources for people just like me and you. Bye now.
Keep putting one foot in front of the other, moving forwards, never looking back. Just one more foot in front of all those countless others, and we're there. Imagine